The tank was supposed to be my salvation, a high-tech cocoon promising relief from my relentless insomnia. Instead, it became my prison. As the lid sealed shut, plunging me into absolute darkness, I felt a shift, not in the water around me, but in the very fabric of my mind. The silence wasn't empty, it pulsed with a life of its own, whispering secrets I never wanted to hear. In that moment of sensory deprivation, I realized with horrifying clarity, the monster I'd been running from wasn't hiding under my bed or in my closet. It was lurking in the depths of my own psyche, and now it was wide awake. I've always been a light sleeper, but the past year has been hell. Insomnia has turned my nights into a waking nightmare, and my days into a foggy mess of exhaustion and irritability. When I heard about NeuroCrest Institute's revolutionary sensory deprivation therapy, it seemed like my last hope. Dr. Mercer's confident smile and the clinic's sleek, almost futuristic interior filled me with a glimmer of optimism. But the moment they sealed the tank for my first session, I knew something was wrong. The silence wasn't empty, it was alive, pulsing with an energy that set my nerves on edge. In that moment of total sensory absence, my mind began to unravel. The first session left me feeling drained yet oddly invigorated. As I emerged from the tank, my skin pruned and my mind buzzing, Dr. Mercer's piercing blue eyes studied me intently. "How do you feel, Zara?" she asked, pen poised over her clipboard. "Like I've been turned inside out," I admitted, reaching for the fluffy white robe Nurse Patel offered. "Is it normal to feel so raw?" Dr. Mercer nodded, a hint of satisfaction in her smile. "Absolutely. The tank strips away external stimuli, allowing your mind to process deeply buried thoughts and emotions. It's not always comfortable, but it's necessary for healing." I left NeuroCrest that day feeling unsettled but intrigued. The next morning, for the first time in months, I woke up feeling somewhat refreshed. Liam noticed immediately, his forehead creasing with a mix of relief and concern as I hummed while making coffee. "You seem different," he said cautiously. "Good different, I think. Did the treatment help?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain the swirling mess of sensations and half-formed memories that had surfaced during my time in the tank. "I think so," I replied finally. "It's intense, but I'm hopeful." As the week progressed, each session became more vivid. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper. I found myself recalling long-forgotten childhood memories with startling clarity, the scent of my grandmother's perfume, the rough texture of my first dog's fur. But not all memories were pleasant. During my fourth session, I relived a terrifying moment from my college years, trapped in a crowded elevator that had suddenly stopped between floors. The panic felt as real as it had a decade ago, my heart racing and sweat beading on my skin despite the temperature-controlled waters surrounding me. When I told Dr. Mercer about this experience, her eyes lit up with an intensity that made me uneasy. "Excellent progress, Zara," she said, leaning forward. "You're confronting your deepest fears. This is exactly what we want to see." I nodded, trying to shake off the lingering anxiety. As I left the clinic that day, I caught Nurse Patel watching me with an unreadable expression. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it, offering only a tight smile as I passed. That night, lying awake beside Liam's sleeping form, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. The silence of our bedroom felt oppressive, echoing the isolation of the tank. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, in the quiet. Just as I was about to wake Liam, desperate for human contact, I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Come back," it said. "We're not finished yet." The whisper haunted me for days. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a lingering effect of the sensory deprivation. But as my sessions at NeuroCrest continued, the line between reality and my experiences in the tank began to blur. During my fifth session, I found myself reliving a heated argument with Liam from years ago. Every word, every gesture was painfully clear. But something was off. In this version, I said things I'd only thought, never dared to voice. The look of hurt on Liam's face was devastating. When I emerged, shaken, Dr. Mercer was practically beaming. "Your subconscious is opening up, Zara. These repressed thoughts and emotions are the key to your insomnia." That night, I picked a fight with Liam over nothing. The words from my tank experience tumbled out before I could stop them. His shocked expression mirrored the one from my vision. "What's gotten into you?" he asked, voice low and hurt. I couldn't answer. I wasn't sure I knew anymore. The next day, I arrived at Neurocrest early, determined to talk to Nurse Patel. I'd seen the concern in his eyes, the aborted attempts to speak to me. He was setting up equipment when I cornered him. "What aren't you telling me?" I demanded. Raj glanced nervously at the door. "Look, I shouldn't say anything, but..." He lowered his voice. "There have been incidents. Patients reporting severe psychological effects. Memory issues, personality changes. The clinic covers it up, says it's all part of the healing process." My blood ran cold. "Why haven't you reported this?" "I tried, once," he said, eyes haunted. "But Dr. Mercer has powerful friends. Just be careful, okay? Don't let them push you too far." Before I could respond, Dr. Mercer's voice rang out. "Zara, you're early. Ready for your final session?" I nodded, my mouth dry. As I settled into the tank, Raj's warning echoed in my mind. But it was too late to back out now. The lid closed, and I was enveloped in darkness. The session started normally, but soon spiraled into a nightmare. I was trapped in a maze of memories, each more distorted than the last. Suddenly, alarms blared. The tank was malfunctioning, refusing to open. Panic set in as the water grew cold, my oxygen depleting. Just as I was about to scream, the lid flew open. Dr. Mercer and Nurse Patel pulled me out, looking concerned. But as my vision cleared, I caught a glimpse of triumph in Dr. Mercer's eyes. "Congratulations, Zara," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You've just experienced our breakthrough protocol. Your mind has been optimized." Realization dawned. This was no accident. They pushed me to my psychological limit deliberately. I'd become their latest success story, but at what cost? As darkness crept into the edges of my vision, I wondered if the person I was would survive this optimization. I left Neurocrest that day, shaken but alive. My insomnia is gone, replaced by a constant, nagging doubt about what's real and what isn't. Liam says I've changed, become more confident but also more distant. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can hear the silence from the tank calling me back. I'm cured, but at what cost? And how many others are out there, forever changed by what they found in the silence within? I can't shake the feeling that my optimization is just the beginning of something much larger and more terrifying than I could have imagined. The old logbook fell open in my hands, its musty pages revealing a chilling secret. I'd taken this night watchman gig at the abandoned logging camp to escape my past, not to unearth someone else's. But as I read the last entry, scrawled in frantic handwriting, my blood turned to ice. They're coming for me. God help me, they're coming. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. That's when I heard the distant whine of a saw echoing through the empty camp. Impossible. I was supposed to be alone out here. Wasn't I? I never imagined a simple night watchman gig could flip my world upside down. The ad painted it as a cakewalk guard in an old logging camp, keep vandals at bay. But from night one, something felt off. My flashlight beam cast unsettling shadows across the rusted equipment, and the wind's whistle through abandoned buildings sounded eerily like hushed voices. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. But as I made my rounds, the sensation of being watched clung to me like a second skin. Then I stumbled upon that old logbook, its pages yellow and brittle with age, and realized this job was going to be anything but straightforward. The logbook belonged to the former foreman, Hank Grimes. At first glance, it seemed mundane work schedules, equipment maintenance logs, supply orders. But as I delved deeper, the entries took a disturbing turn. Grimes' writing became erratic, bordering on paranoid. One entry caught my eye, another saw blade vanish today. These ungrateful mutts think they can pilfer from me? I'll teach them the price of thievery. The venom in those words made my skin crawl. As my shift wore on, I noticed oddities that seemed to echo the logbook. Tools left out of place, as if recently used. Fresh scratches on ancient equipment. Once, I could have sworn I heard a saw's distant whine, but when I investigated, I found nothing but the forest's eerie silence. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe local teens were sneaking in for kicks. But the fence stood intact, with no signs of forced entry. Plus, some of the equipment was so decrepit, it shouldn't have budged an inch. Diving deeper into the logbook revealed more unsettling entries. Grimes wrote about doling out harsh punishments for minor infractions, slashing pay, and enforcing grueling overtime. Accidents became more frequent. Johnson lost 2 fingers today. That's what he gets for questioning my authority, one chilling entry read. The more I uncovered, the more uneasy I felt. It was clear Grimes had been a tyrant, pushing his workers to the breaking point. But something about the final entries made my blood run cold. Grimes scribbled about feeling watched, hearing whispers in the woods. His handwriting devolved into frantic scrawls. The last entry simply stated, "They're coming for me. God help me, they're coming." After that, nothing but blank pages. I scoured the camp's old office and dug up newspaper clippings about the camp's abrupt closure. They mentioned a tragic accident and an ongoing investigation, but details about Grimes' fate or the workers' whereabouts were frustratingly vague. As my nights at the camp stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow retracing Grimes' final days. I'd catch myself standing where he once stood, seeing the camp through his eyes. The isolation, the constant creaking of old wood, the shadows that seemed to shift just beyond my peripheral vision, it all fed into a growing sense of paranoia that I couldn't quite shake. The deeper I delved into the camp's history, the more it consumed me. During my off hours, I found myself researching the area's past, digging through old newspaper archives and local history books. I discovered that Grimes had a reputation for pushing productivity at any cost, often at the expense of worker safety. One night, as I patrolled the perimeter, my flashlight beam caught something reflective near the tree lane. Curious, I approached and found an old hard hat, partially buried in the undergrowth. As I picked it up, I noticed dark stains on the inside. My stomach churned as I realized it might be blood. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something sinister. The isolation of the night shifts began to wear on me. Every creak of the old buildings, every rustle in the woods, set my nerves on edge. I found myself jumping at shadows, constantly looking over my shoulder. One particularly cold night, I decided to warm up in the old foreman's office. As I sat in Grimes' chair, I noticed a loose floorboard. Prying it up, I found a hidden compartment containing a stack of letters. They were from workers' families, pleading with Grimes to improve conditions at the camp. Some mentioned injuries, others hinted at disappearances. The final letter was different, a threat from someone claiming to know what really happened in '89. My hands shook as I read it. What had Grimes done? And why did I feel like I was being pulled into his dark legacy? The next night, I brought a metal detector, determined to search the grounds. For hours, I combed the area, finding nothing but old nails and scraps. Just as I was about to give up, the detector went wild near the old sawmill. I started digging, my heart pounding. About 2 feet down, my shovel hit something solid. I cleared away more dirt, revealing a rusted metal box. With trembling hands, I pried it open. Inside, I found a blood-stained ledger and a stack of old photographs. The images made my blood run cold. They showed Grimes standing over injured workers, a cruel smile on his face. As I flipped through the photos, a piece of paper fluttered to the ground. It was a list of names, dates, and amounts. With growing horror, I realized it was a payoff list, hush money for families of workers who had disappeared. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure. As it stepped into the light, my heart nearly stopped. It was a man in old work clothes, his face hidden by a logging helmet. He moved closer, and I realized with a jolt of terror that the face beneath the helmet was my own, but older, harder, cruel. In that moment, understanding hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just guarding this camp, I was becoming Grimes, reliving his descent into madness and cruelty. And the workers, they weren't ghosts or figments of my imagination. They were real people coming back to confront the man they believed had returned to the scene of his crimes. I ran. My legs pumped furiously as I tore through the forest, branches whipping my face. I didn't stop until the camp was far behind me, lost in the darkness. Gasping for air, I finally slowed, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. As I caught my breath, my eyes fell on my hand. There, just below my thumb, was a scar identical to the one I'd seen in Grimes' old photo. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened in that camp. But one thing's certain, I can never go back. Some legacies are better left buried in the woods. The crunch of gravel under unfamiliar tires jolted me awake. My watch read 2:37 a.m., way too early for the relief shift. Rubbing sleep from my eyes, I peered out the watchtower's grimy window. A beat-up pickup idled below, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist. Two figures emerged, carrying something heavy between them. My breath caught as they dragged it towards the tower's base. In my 20 years as a forest ranger, I'd seen plenty of strange things, but nothing like this. I reached for my radio, but my hand froze mid-air. The staticky voice coming through wasn't from any channel I recognized. I'm Jebediah Hawkins, Jeb to most folks, and at 58, I've seen my fair share of strange things in these woods. But nothing quite like this. I've been a forest ranger for over 3 decades, and this rickety old fire watchtower has been my second home for most of that time. When they decided to decommission it last month, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. That's why I volunteered for one last shift, a final farewell to this silent sentinel of the forest. As I peered out into the inky blackness, my mind raced. Who could be out there at this ungodly hour? The nearest hiking trail was miles away, and we hadn't had a proper fire season in years. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, radio, and my trusty Leatherman, and began the treacherous descent down the tower's spiral staircase. Each step groaned under my weight, the old wood protesting after years of disuse. The darkness pressed in around me, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the gloam. The air grew thicker as I descended, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something else, something metallic and unsettling. Reaching the ground floor, I noticed something off. The door, which I distinctly remembered closing and latching earlier, stood slightly ajar. A cool breeze whispered through the gap, carrying with it the rustling of leaves and a faint, unfamiliar scent. I pushed the door open, wincing at the loud creak that shattered the night silence. My flashlight beam danced across the clearing, searching for the figure I'd seen from above. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound, just the looming shadows of ancient pines. That's when I saw it, a backpack, definitely not mine, propped against the base of the tower. My throat tightened as I approached it. Who did it belong to? And more importantly, where were they now? With trembling hands, I unzipped the main compartment. Inside, I found a high-end camera, a notebook filled with hastily scribbled coordinates, and a crumpled map of the forest. Red circles marked areas deep in the woods, far from any official trails or campsites. As I leafed through the notebook, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the ground. I picked it up, unfolding it carefully. My blood ran cold as I read the hastily scrawled message. If you're reading this, they found us. Don't trust that the rest was illegible, smeared with what looked disturbingly like blood. My hands shook as I stuffed the note into my pocket. The weight of the situation bore down on me like a physical force. Someone was out there, possibly hurt, definitely scared. I had to find them. I set off into the forest, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The familiar trails I'd walked 1,000 times seemed alien now, shadows twisting into menacing shapes at the edge of my vision. Every snapping twig under my boots made me flinch. About a quarter mile in, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach lurch. A small clearing, obviously man-made, littered with fresh sawdust and the acrid smell of gasoline. Chainsaw marks scarred several massive old growth trees. This was no sanctioned operation. I was looking at an illegal logging site. As I examined the area, my foot caught on something. I aimed my light down and felt the blood drain from my face. A camera tripod lay broken on the ground, its legs bent at unnatural angles. Nearby, I found scraps of fabric caught on low-hanging branches. Signs of a struggle. A twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. No response came, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I needed to get back to the tower to call this in. As I turned to leave, my light caught something reflective. Half buried in the soft earth was a ranger's badge, not from our district. What was another ranger doing out here, off the books? The journey back to the tower felt twice as long. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. When I finally reached the clearing, relief washed over me until I looked up. Light spilled from the tower's windows. Someone was up there. Swallowing my fear, I began to climb. Each step of the old staircase felt like it might be my last, the wood creaking ominously under my weight. As I neared the top, I heard hushed voices, panic evident in their tone. I took a deep breath and pushed open the trap door. 2 pairs of wide, terrified eyes met mine. A young woman and man, probably in their early 20s, huddled in the corner of the tower. The woman clutched a video camera to her chest like a lifeline. "Please," she whispered, "you have to help us." "I'm Zoe, this is Ash. We're environmental activists. We were documenting the illegal logging when they spotted us. They've been hunting us all night." Before I could respond, a beam of light swept across the tower's windows. The rumble of approaching vehicles shattered the night silence. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. The loggers were back, and they were looking to silence any witnesses. I helped Zoe and Ash hide, then steeled myself for a confrontation. As heavy footsteps approached, I realized this final watch might truly be my last. As the loggers began their ascent, I made a split-second decision. I positioned myself at the top of the stairs, heart racing. When the first man appeared, I bluffed, voice steadier than I felt, "This is Federal Agent Hawkins. The area is surrounded. Surrender now." A tense silence followed. Then, miraculously, I heard retreating footsteps and engines roaring to life. As relief washed over me, a faint sound caught my ear, sirens in the distance. But were they really coming, or was it just the wind playing tricks? In that moment, atop the old watchtower, my fate hung as uncertain as the mist-shrouded forest below. The crunch of dead leaves under my boots was the only sound in the eerie silence of Black Ridge Forest. 15 years as a search and rescue volunteer hadn't prepared me for this. The raw stumps of illegally felled trees stood like accusing fingers pointing at the sky. As I pushed deeper into the logged area, searching for the missing hiker, a glint caught my eye. There, embedded in a massive stump, was something that shouldn't be there, a camera lens, and it was recording. In that moment, I realized this was no ordinary missing person case. The forest was hiding secrets, and I had just stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The call came in just after midnight. Jade Chen, a 23-year-old amateur photographer, hadn't returned from her day hike. Her car was still in the parking lot, and her last social media post showed a breathtaking sunset over Black Ridge Forest. As I geared up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a typical rescue. I'd grown up near Black Ridge, watching it change over the years. What was once a lush, vibrant ecosystem had become a patchwork of healthy forest and barren, logged areas. The contrast always hit me hard, but tonight, in the beam of my flashlight, it felt particularly ominous. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the familiar sense of pine and damp earth gave way to something acrid, the lingering odor of machinery and freshly cut wood. I'd heard rumors of illegal logging, but seeing the evidence firsthand made my stomach churn. "Jade!" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally in the stripped landscape. No response. The terrain became increasingly treacherous. Hidden beneath the leaf litter, abandoned logging equipment created a maze of twisted metal and jagged edges. I nearly lost my footing several times, imagining how dangerous it would be for an inexperienced hiker, especially in the dark. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I swung my flashlight around, half expecting to see Jade. Instead, I locked eyes with a gaunt, sickly-looking deer. It stared at me for a long moment before limping away, favoring its left hind leg. The sight of its ribs visible, coat patchy, was a stark reminder of how the logging had disrupted the local wildlife. As dawn broke, casting long shadows through the stumps and fallen logs, I came across something that made my blood run cold. There, caught on a jagged piece of metal, was a scrap of bright blue fabric the same color as the jacket Jade had been wearing in her last photo. My training kicked in, and I began to methodically search the area. That's when I noticed something odd about one of the larger stumps nearby. It seemed off somehow. As I approached, my flashlight caught a glint of something metallic embedded in the wood. I leaned in for a closer look, my heart pounding. What I saw made me recoil in shock. It wasn't just metal, it was a camera lens, and it was recording. My mind raced as I stared at the hidden camera. Who put it here? And why? I carefully examined the stump, noticing how expertly the camera was concealed. This wasn't some amateur setup. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep this hidden. I debated whether to remove it, but decided against tampering with potential evidence. Instead, I marked the location on my GPS and continued my search for Jade, now with an added sense of urgency. As I pressed on, the forest seemed to close in around me. The logged areas gave way to denser, untouched woods, but the feeling of unease persisted. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Jade! I called out again, my voice hoarse. Jade Chen. A faint sound caught my attention, not a response, but a mechanical whir. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, coming from my left. I moved cautiously toward the noise, pushing through thick underbrush. I emerged into a small clearing and my jaw dropped. Before me stood a massive, state-of-the-art logging machine, partially hidden under camo netting. This was no ordinary logging operation. As I approached the machine, movement in my peripheral vision made me duck behind a tree. Two men in dark clothing emerged from the woods, speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their furtive glances and agitated gestures told me all I needed to know. These weren't just loggers, they were up to something far more sinister. My heart pounded as I weighed my options. I needed to find Jade, but I also couldn't ignore what I'd stumbled upon. Just as I was about to retreat and call for backup, I heard something that made my blood run cold. What about the girl? One of the men asked. Don't worry, the other replied, his voice cold. She won't be talking to anyone. In that moment, adrenaline took over. I burst from my hiding spot, catching the men off guard. Where is she? I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. The men exchanged glances, then the larger one lunged at me. I dodged, but the forest floor betrayed me. I slipped on the damp leaves, crashing hard onto my back. As I struggled to my feet, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Alex? Is that you? I turned to see Jade emerging from behind the logging machine, her camera clutched tightly to her chest, eyes wide with fear and confusion. The reality hit me like a punch to the gut. Jade wasn't just a lost hiker, she was a witness. And in trying to rescue her, I just exposed us both to whatever dark secret these woods were hiding. We made it out of the forest that day, Jade and I. But the truth of what we uncovered in Blackridge remains tangled in a web of bureaucracy and thinly veiled threats. Jade's photos and my testimony sparked an investigation, but key evidence keeps disappearing. Sometimes, I wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of chainsaws ringing in my ears. And on my days off, I find myself drawn back to those silent stumps, searching for answers. Because deep down, I know the real danger isn't in the forest. It's in the shadows of the town I once thought I knew. The crunch of dead leaves under my boots echoed through Blackwood Forest, each step carrying me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. Just days ago, I was a dying man, my body ravaged by cancer. Now, I feel decades younger, but the price. God, the price. I've seen things in these woods that defy explanation, hikers aging years and minutes, springs that pulse with an otherworldly energy. But it's the government facility hidden in the heart of the forest that truly terrifies me. What I discovered there. I'm running now, my rejuvenated legs pumping furiously. But I can't outrun the truth or the choice I have to make. I never believed in miracles until I stepped into Blackwood Forest. The locals whispered about its hidden springs, claiming they could add years to your life. Desperate and terminal, I laughed it off as superstition. But here I am, feeling my withered muscles grow stronger with each step deeper into the woods. My gray hairs darkening, my wrinkles smoothing out. It's no magic, there's got to be something in the water, the air, the soil. Something that science hasn't discovered yet. I should be ecstatic, but a gnawing dread grows in my gut. Because nothing comes without a price, and I'm starting to see the true cost of this miracle written on the faces of the other hikers I pass. My name's Evan Thorne. 2 months ago, I was a 68-year-old retiree with stage 4 pancreatic cancer and 6 months to live. Now, as I trek through Blackwood Forest, I feel like I'm in my 40s again. It's surreal and, frankly, terrifying. I first heard about this place from my oncologist, Dr. Reeves. She mentioned it offhandedly, probably thinking I was too doped up on pain meds to catch it. If only Blackwood's rumors were true, she'd muttered. When I pressed her, she clammed up, but it was enough to spark my curiosity. A week of internet deep dives led me to a forum for terminal patients. They shared wild stories about Blackwood Forest, a place where the dying go in and the living come out. Most posts read like desperate fairy tales, but a few had before and after photos that made my jaw drop. What did I have to lose? I was already a dead man walking. The journey here wasn't easy. Blackwood's buried deep in the Appalachians, miles from the nearest town. No roads lead directly to it, you have to hike in. For a guy who could barely shuffle to the bathroom, it seemed impossible. But desperation is one hell of a motivator. I set out at dawn 3 days ago, my backpack loaded with water, protein bars, and more meds than food. The first day was agony. Every step felt like my last. I collapsed into my tent that night, certain I'd die before morning. But I didn't. I woke up feeling different. Stronger. The crippling pain that had been my constant companion for months had dulled to a manageable ache. I chalked it up to the clean mountain air and pushed on. By the second day, I could breathe without wheezing. My hands stopped shaking. And this morning, I jogged the last mile to the forest's edge. Now, as I stand beneath the ancient canopy of Blackwood, I'm torn between hope and horror. Because I'm not the only one here seeking a miracle. I've passed dozens of hikers, some looking healthier and younger with each encounter, others who look like they're aging years in a matter of hours. A young woman stumbled past me earlier, her hair graying before my eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25, but she moved like she was pushing 80. Our eyes met briefly, and the despair I saw there chilled me to my core. What the hell is really going on in this forest? As I ventured deeper into Blackwood, the forest seemed to close in around me. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and vaguely medicinal. I found myself following a faint trail, barely visible among the undergrowth, that led me to a series of clear, bubbling springs. The water looked pristine, almost too perfect. I cupped my hands and drank deeply, the cool liquid sending a jolt through my system. Within minutes, I felt a surge of energy unlike anything I'd experienced since my diagnosis. It was here I met Dr. Lydia Vance, a scientist who claimed to be studying the forest's unique ecosystem. Her eyes lit up when I mentioned my improving condition. Fascinating, she murmured, scribbling in her notebook. The mineral composition here is unlike anything I've seen. There could be undiscovered microorganisms in the soil, the water. But we need more data. She warned me about potential side effects, the need for more research. But I was too elated by my apparent recovery to heed her cautions. As days passed, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Younger visitors seemed to age rapidly, while the elderly appeared rejuvenated. I overheard hushed conversations about missing persons and time discrepancies. The forest rangers, always watching from a distance, seemed to know more than they let on. My geologist's instincts kicked in. I began collecting soil and water samples, analyzing them with the basic kit I'd brought along. What I found defied explanation, a complex chemical reaction that seemed to affect human biology at a cellular level. The horrible truth dawned on me: Blackwood wasn't creating time. It was redistributing it. As my body grew stronger, my conscience weakened. Was my life worth more than those who were unknowingly sacrificing their youth? The forest had become a moral quagmire, and I was sinking fast. Determined to expose the truth, I snuck out one night to gather more evidence. That's when I stumbled upon the hidden government facility. Inside, rows of people young and old lay connected to ominous machines. They were harvesting time from the young to give to the old and wealthy. Dr. Vance appeared, her face a mask of cold ambition. Think of the possibilities, Evan, she urged. We could extend human life indefinitely. But as she spoke, I noticed her hands wrinkled and aged. She'd been taking time too, at others' expense. Revulsion and anger surged through me. In that moment, I saw the true face of human greed. I couldn't let this continue. With my restored strength, I lunged for the control panel, smashing it. Alarms blared as chaos erupted. I ran, praying I could expose this madness before it was too late. I made it out, but at what cost? My body's young again, but for how long? And what about those left behind? I've sent my evidence to every news outlet, but part of me wonders if it'll ever see the light of day. Some nights, I wake up gasping, feeling time slipping away. Other times, I catch myself longing for just one more drink from those springs. Blackwood Forest saved my life, but now I live with the weight of stolen time. Was it worth it? I honestly don't know.
Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.